The woman everyone overlooked was about to give back something no doctor, no miracle, and no amount of money ever could. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe dignity is worth more than pride, hit like and subscribe. Now back to Darius Brooks. The music stopped before anyone realized why. It wasn't because the string quartet had reached the end of the piece. It wasn't because the guests had grown quiet. It was because silence, thick and merciless, had swept across the grand ballroom like an invisible tide, swallowing every whispered conversation, every polite laugh, every forced smile. Darius Brooks sat alone at the altar in his custom-built wheelchair, his hands resting motionless on his lap. His tailored black tuxedo fit him perfectly. The white rose pinned to his jacket remained flawless. Every detail had been prepared with impossible care for the happiest day of his life. Everything except the bride. She was gone. 1 minute earlier, Evelyn Carter had stood at the end of the aisle, radiant beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. Guests had smiled through misty eyes as the wedding march echoed across the marble hall. But then she looked toward Darius, not into his eyes, but at the wheelchair beneath him. Her smile vanished. She whispered something to her father. Then she turned around, without a single glance back, without a goodbye, without enough courage to let the man she claimed to love hear the truth from her own lips. The heavy wooden doors closed behind her with a hollow thud that echoed through the ballroom louder than any scream. No one moved. A little girl clutched her mother's hand. An elderly man quietly lowered his head. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances before pretending to check their phones. Others simply looked away, as though avoiding the sight would somehow lessen the cruelty unfolding before them. Darius remained perfectly still. Months earlier, the former college football star had believed surviving the crash was the hardest battle of his life. The surgeons had warned him that he would never walk again. He had endured endless rehabilitation sessions, sleepless nights, unbearable pain, and the slow realization that every dream he'd built with his own 2 legs had disappeared beneath twisted steel on a rain-soaked highway. None of that hurt as much as this. Not because he had lost a bride, because he had just lost the last piece of evidence that someone could still choose him despite the wheelchair. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the polished armrest. His breathing remained calm. Only the tiny muscle trembling beneath his jaw betrayed the storm tearing through his chest. Across the ballroom, people whispered in voices they believed he couldn't hear. She couldn't do it. I guess she finally realized what marriage would be like. Poor guy. He'll never recover from this. Pity. It filled the room more heavily than perfume or candle smoke. Darius had once inspired crowds to chant his name beneath Friday night stadium lights. Today, he inspired nothing but sympathy, and sympathy felt strangely close to humiliation. One by one, guests began leaving. Some avoided looking at him altogether. Others offered awkward nods that carried no comfort. Within minutes, the magnificent ballroom that had cost a fortune to decorate looked less like a wedding venue and more like the remains of a celebration that had never truly begun. Only scattered white rose petals remained across the polished marble floor. Near the back of the room, where no cameras pointed and no guests bothered to notice, someone quietly stepped forward. She wasn't wearing an expensive gown. She wasn't part of the wedding party. She wasn't family. Her black service uniform fit tightly around her full figure, and strands of natural curls had escaped beneath her neatly tied scarf after hours of carrying trays and clearing tables. Sweat glistened lightly across her forehead, but her movements remained gentle, almost careful enough not to disturb the silence itself. Her name was Monica Carter. Most guests hadn't looked at her once all afternoon. To them, she was simply the overweight banquet attendant who refilled glasses before disappearing back into the kitchen. As she crossed the empty aisle, something caught her eye. A simple, platinum wedding ring rested alone between scattered rose petals, reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers. She bent down slowly, picked it up with both hands, and looked toward the man everyone else had quietly abandoned. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Monica walked the remaining distance, stopped beside his wheelchair, gently placed the ring into his open palm, and said in a voice barely louder than a whisper, "They walked away from your wedding, but they don't get to walk away with your dignity." Darius lifted his eyes for the first time that day. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the first person who truly saw him after losing everything was the woman nobody else had even noticed. For 3 days after the wedding that never happened, Darius Brooks disappeared from the world. Not physically. The world simply stopped existing beyond the walls of his downtown Chicago apartment. Morning sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, turning the polished hardwood floors golden. Expensive artwork still hung neatly on the walls. Framed photographs from another lifetime remained untouched. Images of a smiling young athlete lifting championship trophies, sprinting across football fields beneath roaring stadium lights, his powerful legs carrying dreams that once seemed indestructible. Darius couldn't bear to look at them anymore. Every picture felt like evidence from someone else's life. Someone worth loving. Someone worth choosing. The wheelchair remained parked beside the enormous window for hours each day. From there, he watched strangers walking below, couples holding hands, children racing each other across the park, elderly neighbors strolling with quiet determination. None of them knew the man sitting silently 20 floors above them had once outrun almost everyone he had ever met. Now the greatest distance he traveled each day was from the bedroom to the living room. His phone vibrated constantly. Messages poured in from former teammates. "We're here if you need us. Stay strong, brother. You'll get through this." He never answered. Sympathy had become another reminder of everything he had lost. On the 4th morning, his older sister, Angela Brooks, let herself into the apartment with the spare key he had forgotten she still possessed. She found him exactly where she expected, still wearing yesterday's sweatpants, unshaven, motionless before the window. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. "I'm not hungry. You haven't showered." Silence. Angela walked slowly into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Nothing inside had been touched since the wedding. She returned carrying a bottle of water and quietly placed it beside him. "I saw the videos." His jaw tightened. Every major wedding guest had posted something online. Some called Evelyn heartless. Others called Darius brave. Millions of strangers debated the worst day of his life as though it were entertainment. "I don't want to talk about it." "I know." Angela crouched beside the wheelchair until their eyes met. "You know what hurts me most?" Darius didn't answer. It wasn't that she left. He finally looked at her. It was the way everyone looked at you afterward. He swallowed. Not because she was wrong, because she understood. People no longer saw Darius Brooks. They saw a tragedy, a cautionary tale, a man whose value had expired the day his legs stopped working. "They weren't looking at me," he whispered. "They were looking at what they think disability means." Angela reached for his hand. "They're wrong." He forced a tired smile. "No, they're realistic." The words hung heavily between them. Before the accident, companies competed to sponsor him. Children waited hours for his autograph. Friends constantly invited him to parties, business dinners, charity events. After the accident, the invitations slowly disappeared. The phone became quieter. Conversations became shorter. People insisted nothing had changed. Yet everything had. Even Evelyn. She had promised forever while doctors still talked about hope. She had stayed through months of surgeries, months of rehabilitation, months of pain. But somewhere between the hospital corridors and the wedding aisle, forever quietly became too expensive. Darius couldn't even blame her anymore. Perhaps she had simply admitted aloud what everyone else secretly believed. Who would willingly choose a husband who could never dance? Who could never carry his future children across the yard? Who might always need help instead of giving it? His reflection stared back from the dark television screen across the room. Not broken, not ugly, just unfinished. Later that afternoon, someone knocked on the apartment door. Angela answered before Darius could protest. Standing outside was a woman carrying 2 large paper grocery bags. She wore ordinary jeans, white sneakers, and a loose blue sweater. Her natural curls framed a warm face untouched by expensive makeup. Her full figure filled the doorway, yet there was nothing awkward about the quiet confidence with which she stood. "Darius left this at the hotel," she said, lifting a small velvet box. Angela frowned. "The wedding ring?" The woman nodded. "And the catering manager asked me to bring these." She held up the grocery bags. The flowers from the reception were going to be thrown away. Angela stepped aside. "Please come in." The woman hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." From the living room, Darius recognized her immediately. The banquet attendant. The same woman who had placed the ring back into his hand while everyone else walked away. Monica Carter. She entered quietly, setting the bags beside the dining table. White roses. Dozens of them. The very flowers meant to celebrate a marriage that had never begun. "They're still beautiful," Monica said gently, noticing Darius staring at them. They didn't do anything wrong. For the first time in days, Darius found himself looking at something other than his own pain. Not the abandoned wedding. Not the wheelchair. Not the silence. Just a woman who saw beauty in flowers everyone else had decided to throw away. And somehow, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't talking about the roses at all. Some people save lives with medicine. Others save them by refusing to look away when everyone else does. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh roses the next morning. Angela had arranged the flowers Monica brought into simple glass vases throughout the living room. White petals caught the morning sunlight, softening a home that had felt cold and abandoned only a day before. Darius noticed them immediately. He wished he hadn't. Every rose reminded him of vows that had never been spoken. Every bloom seemed to whisper the same cruel question. Why weren't you enough? He wheeled himself into the kitchen without saying a word. Coffee brewed slowly, filling the room with warmth that never seemed to reach him. Before the accident, mornings had always begun with movement. 5-mile runs before sunrise, weightlifting sessions, phone calls from coaches and business partners. Now the loudest sound was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. A knock interrupted the silence. Darius considered ignoring it. Angela answered instead. "Good morning," Monica said with a shy smile, balancing 2 paper cups in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. "I was passing by." Angela smiled knowingly. "No one accidentally passes by the 20th floor." Monica laughed, embarrassed. I wanted to make sure the flowers found a home." She stepped inside after Angela insisted. Her sweater was oversized, her curly hair tied into a loose puff, and she wore no jewelry except a simple silver watch with a cracked leather band. She looked nothing like the glamorous women Darius had dated during his football career. She also looked completely comfortable with herself. That puzzled him. "I brought coffee," she said, placing 1 cup near Darius. "I don't know how you take it." "I don't." She blinked. "I stopped drinking coffee after rehabilitation." An awkward silence followed. Most people rushed to fill uncomfortable moments with apologies. Monica didn't. She simply picked up the cup. "Then I'll drink both." Angela hid a smile behind her own mug. For the first time since the wedding, the apartment felt almost normal. Almost. Monica wandered toward the window overlooking the lake. "It's beautiful." "It is. You don't look at it." Darius frowned. "I look at it every day." "No." She turned toward him. "You stare through it." The words landed gently, not as criticism, as observation. He had no answer. Instead of changing the subject, Monica noticed several dusty picture frames on a bookshelf. She walked over carefully, studying them one by one. There was Darius lifting a state championship trophy. Darius laughing with teammates after a national television interview. Darius crossing a finish line, arms raised high. She smiled. "You had a good laugh." He looked surprised. "What?" "In these pictures. You laughed with your whole face." She glanced back toward him. "I haven't seen that man yet." Most visitors asked about the wheelchair. Doctors asked about pain levels. Journalists asked about recovery. Former teammates asked whether he missed football. No one had ever asked where his laughter had gone. I don't know where he is, Darius admitted quietly. Monica nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. I lost someone once too. He assumed she meant a family member. I'm sorry. I wasn't talking about another person. She rested her fingertips on one of the framed photographs. I meant myself. The room grew still. When I was 26, I weighed almost 400 pounds. Darius looked at her, surprised. I stopped going outside unless I absolutely had to. I stopped looking into mirrors. I convinced myself people only saw my body. She smiled faintly. The funny thing is, they actually did. There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. I spent years believing I had to become someone else before I deserved kindness. She looked directly into his eyes. I was wrong. Darius lowered his gaze. So am I. You think your wheelchair erased the man in these pictures? It did. No. She shook her head. It only erased the version of you that depended on walking. Another silence settled between them. Outside, sailboats drifted slowly across the blue water. Inside, something almost imperceptible shifted. Not healing. Healing was far too big a word. But perhaps, the first tiny crack in the wall Darius had built around himself. Monica reached into the paper bag she had brought. I almost forgot. She placed a folded newspaper on the table. The front page featured a large photograph from the failed wedding. Darius's face. The abandoned altar. The empty aisle. He instinctively pushed it away. Monica quietly folded the newspaper in half, then folded it again, until the picture disappeared inside a square no larger than her palm. There. She tossed it into the recycling bin. That's where people throw yesterday's news. She met his eyes one last time before heading toward the door. But people. She smiled softly. They're never yesterday's news. The apartment fell silent after she left. Darius found himself staring not at the discarded newspaper, but at the empty coffee cup she had forgotten on the table. For reasons he couldn't explain, it was the first object left behind that didn't remind him of someone walking away. It reminded him that someone had chosen to come back. Healing rarely announces itself. More often, it arrives disguised as ordinary days that quietly refuse to let you stay broken. A week passed, then another. Monica never called ahead. She never asked permission to check on Darius. She simply appeared now and then, always carrying something wonderfully ordinary. Fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery. A crossword puzzle she couldn't finish. A paperback novel she claimed everyone should read at least once. Sometimes she brought nothing at all except herself. And strangely, that became enough. She never hovered over his wheelchair. She never rushed to push it without asking. The first time they met outside the apartment, Darius instinctively expected her to reach for the handles. She didn't. Instead, she opened the cafe door and walked inside. You coming? She asked over her shoulder. He stared at her. She hadn't even looked back to see whether he needed help. Not because she didn't care, because she assumed he could decide for himself. It took him nearly 30 seconds to maneuver through the doorway. Customers glanced over briefly before returning to their conversations. When he finally reached the table, Monica smiled. I was beginning to think you didn't like coffee anymore. You could have helped. I could have. She stirred cream into her drink. But you didn't ask. Darius leaned back, unsure whether to be annoyed or impressed. Most people treated him like fragile glass. Monica treated him like an adult. The difference was impossible to ignore. Days later, they met again, this time at Lincoln Park. Children chased pigeons across winding sidewalks while dogs pulled impatient owners toward the lakefront. Monica walked beside him without slowing her pace. She talked about books, movies, the best peach pie in Chicago, everything except his disability. Eventually, Darius couldn't take it anymore. You know. She looked at him. You've never asked how the accident happened. I know. You've never asked if I miss football. I know. You've never even asked whether I'll ever walk again. Monica stopped beneath the shade of an enormous oak tree. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the park. I figured. She shrugged gently. If there comes a day when you want me to know those things, you'll tell me. And if you never do, that's okay too. Darius searched her face for pity. There wasn't any. Only patience. The kind that asks for nothing. That evening, while scrolling mindlessly through social media, Darius came across an interview clip from months before his accident. He was smiling into the camera. Confident. Fearless. Thousands of comments praised his determination, his charisma, his future. Without thinking, he opened the comments beneath the recent wedding video. She deserved better. No woman should have to sacrifice her whole life. He's inspiring, but let's be realistic. You can't blame the bride. His thumb froze. Then another notification appeared. Someone had tagged him in a local community photo. It had been taken that afternoon in the park. There he was, in his wheelchair, laughing, actually laughing, across from Monica, who had apparently been telling a terrible joke. The comments beneath the picture surprised him. Whoever she's talking to looks genuinely happy. They have such wholesome energy. That smile looks real. No one mentioned the wheelchair. No one discussed the accident. No one called him tragic. For the first time in months, he wasn't the story. He was simply part of one. A few days later, Monica invited him to a small neighborhood farmer's market. Colorful tents lined the sidewalks. Local musicians played jazz beneath strings of lights. Families sampled homemade jams while children ran between flower stalls. An elderly vendor accidentally dropped several wooden crates of apples onto the pavement. Fruit rolled in every direction. Without hesitation, Darius wheeled toward the scattered apples. Using the reacher clipped discreetly beneath his chair, he began collecting them one by one. Monica joined him. Soon strangers stopped to help. Within minutes, every apple was back where it belonged. The old vendor smiled gratefully. You two make a good team. Darius glanced toward Monica. She only grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. As they prepared to leave, a young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom! The woman looked down. Yes, I want a wheelchair like his. His mother looked horrified. No, sweetheart. But the little boy continued. It goes really fast. Darius couldn't help laughing. So did Monica. Children, he realized, often saw possibility before adults taught them limitation. As the sun dipped below Chicago's skyline, golden light reflected across the lake, wrapping the city in warmth. They paused at the edge of the water. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. For weeks after the wedding, Darius had believed Monica was helping him survive. Standing there beside her, watching the evening ripple across the lake, he finally understood something much deeper. She wasn't trying to rescue him from his life. She was quietly refusing to let his wheelchair become the most interesting thing about him. And without realizing it, he had already begun doing the same. The deepest wounds are often the ones people applaud you for hiding. Autumn arrived quietly in Chicago. Leaves drifted across sidewalks like scattered pieces of old memories, painting the city in gold, crimson, and amber. The air grew colder, yet Darius found himself spending more time outside than he had in nearly 2 years. Not because his body had changed, because something inside him had. On Saturday mornings, he and Monica wandered through bookstores that smelled of coffee and worn paper. On quiet evenings, they sat beside the lake watching sailboats disappear into the orange horizon. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they hardly spoke at all. Neither silence ever felt uncomfortable. One rainy afternoon, Monica invited him to help at the neighborhood community kitchen, where she volunteered every weekend. You'll probably hate it, she joked. I already hate waking up early. Perfect. He smiled. You'll fit right in. The old church basement buzzed with activity. Volunteers chopped vegetables, stirred giant soup pots, folded donated clothes, and laughed over stories that only regulars understood. Nobody stared at Darius's wheelchair. Someone simply handed him a clipboard. Can you organize the food inventory? Another volunteer rolled over 3 boxes of canned goods. We've been waiting for someone organized. Within minutes, he was directing supplies, counting donations, assigning shelves, and solving logistical problems that had frustrated the team for weeks. His old leadership instincts returned naturally. Not forced, not remembered, simply alive. An elderly volunteer named Mrs. Jenkins watched him for a while before whispering to Monica, "That young man has forgotten he's broken." Monica smiled gently. "No. He finally remembered he isn't." Later that afternoon, after the last family had collected warm meals, Monica remained behind to wash dishes. Darius dried them beside her. Steam filled the kitchen windows. The room smelled of soap, bread, and homemade chicken soup. "You've never told me why you started volunteering," he said. Monica continued scrubbing a ceramic bowl. "I didn't. You've talked about books, the bakery, your favorite movies, but never this." She stood quietly for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard. "Because someone once fed me." Darius looked up. "I was 30 years old. I had no apartment, no savings, no confidence. I slept in my car for almost 4 months." His hands stopped moving. She laughed quietly. "I know. Most people assume overweight people never go hungry. They don't realize loneliness can be just as empty as an empty stomach." Rain tapped gently against the basement windows. Monica placed another clean plate on the drying rack. "When I lost my job, I stopped answering my phone. I stopped visiting family. I convinced myself everyone who looked at me saw failure." She smiled sadly. "The strange thing is, nobody had to say anything cruel. I had already learned to say it to myself." Darius stared at her. Every time they had spoken, Monica seemed so steady, so comfortable, so impossible to embarrass. He had assumed she had always been that way. "I wasn't born confident," she continued. "I built confidence one ordinary day at a time. Someone here gave me my first hot meal." She glanced around the nearly empty kitchen. "They never asked why I was struggling. They just made room at the table." Silence settled between them, not painful, sacred. Darius finally understood why Monica never treated him with pity. She recognized the language of invisible shame because she had spoken it herself. Not from a wheelchair, from behind years of believing she wasn't worthy of being seen. As they prepared to leave, they passed an old mirror hanging near the church entrance. Its edges were chipped with age, the glass slightly warped. Darius caught their reflections together. His wheelchair, her full figure. Neither of them looked like the people magazine covers celebrated. Neither matched the world's definition of perfect. Yet something unexpected caught his attention. They both looked peaceful. Monica noticed him staring. "What?" He shook his head slowly. "I've spent 2 years looking for the man I used to be. And," he smiled, "I don't think I want him back anymore." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the church door. Cold evening air rushed inside. "I think," she said softly, "you're finally becoming the man you were supposed to be." For a long moment, neither moved. Outside, people hurried past beneath umbrellas, never noticing the quiet transformation taking place inside the old brick church. But somewhere deep within Darius Brooks, another wall had just fallen. For the first time since the accident, he no longer measured his worth by everything he had lost. He had begun measuring it by every life he was still capable of touching. And Monica, though she never intended to become anyone's hero, had just revealed the hidden scar that made her kindness so extraordinary. She wasn't rescuing Darius from despair. She was simply extending the same hand that, years ago, someone had once extended to her. Sometimes life doesn't return what it took from you. Instead, it gives you something you never knew you needed. Winter settled over Chicago with quiet determination. Snow-blanketed rooftops, softened noisy streets, and covered old scars beneath a layer of white. The city seemed slower, gentler, as though even time respected the silence that winter demanded. Darius had changed with the season. 3 mornings each week, He volunteered at the community kitchen before heading to a local nonprofit that helped athletes adjust to life after career-ending injuries. His experience, once something he hid from the world, had quietly become the very thing others needed to hear. He no longer introduced himself as the man whose bride walked away. He simply introduced himself as Darius. And somehow, that was enough. One afternoon, after finishing a support group meeting, he found Monica waiting outside beneath the awning, wrapped in a thick wool coat with snowflakes collecting in her curls. "You look busy these days," she teased. "I learned from the best." She rolled her eyes. "I hope not. I'm late for everything." He laughed. The sound surprised both of them. Came easily now. Not because life had become easier, because carrying joy no longer felt like a betrayal of his pain. They crossed the street toward a small diner where the windows glowed with warm yellow light. Inside, waitresses hurried between booths carrying steaming plates while old Christmas songs played softly through hidden speakers. A young server approached with menus, then froze. Her eyes widened. "Darius." He looked up. Took him several seconds to recognize her. Emily? She had been one of the athletic trainers from his university years, back when stadium lights still defined his future. "It's so good to see you." Her smile was genuine. She glanced toward Monica. "Your wife." Before Darius could answer, Monica almost choked on her water. "Oh, no," Emily laughed awkwardly. "I'm sorry. I just assumed." She hurried away, embarrassed. Monica looked down at her menu. "So?" Darius smiled. "So?" Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Inside, something unspoken filled the silence. Not awkwardness. Possibility. "You didn't correct her very fast," Monica finally said. "I noticed you didn't either." Color rose in her cheeks. She pretended to study the dessert menu. "You would have made a terrible lawyer." "So would you." They both laughed. For the first time, the idea of a future together entered the room. Not through confession. Not through dramatic declarations. Simply through one honest misunderstanding that neither seemed eager to erase. Later that evening, Darius wheeled Monica to her apartment building. The neighborhood was quiet beneath fresh snow. Streetlights reflected off icy sidewalks, turning everything silver. Before she opened the front gate, Monica hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you look at me." She struggled to finish the sentence. "What do you see?" The question caught him completely off guard. He had spent months believing only he carried invisible wounds. Now he realized even the strongest people still wondered whether they were enough. He looked at her carefully. Not quickly. Carefully. "I see the woman who walked into my life carrying grocery bags. The woman who folded away the worst day of my life like yesterday's newspaper. The woman who never treated me like I needed fixing." His voice softened. "I see someone who reminds people who they are." Monica's eyes shimmered. "You didn't mention what I look like." He smiled. "I thought you asked what I see." Neither of them moved. Snowflakes landed quietly on his blanket, on her coat, on the silence between them. Then Monica laughed through tears. "I spent years trying to become invisible. You failed." She looked at him. Completely. A tear escaped despite her smile. "You've been impossible not to notice." She reached out instinctively. Her hand rested lightly over his. Neither romance nor friendship seemed large enough to describe what had grown between them. It was trust. The kind built from ordinary conversations, shared burdens, quiet mornings, and countless moments when neither person asked the other to become someone different. As Darius watched Monica disappear through the apartment entrance, he realized something extraordinary. Months earlier, he had believed losing Evelyn had destroyed his future. Now he understood something far more profound. Sometimes the door that closes isn't punishment. It's protection. Because had one woman stayed, he never would have met the one who quietly taught him that dignity isn't found in walking, winning, or being admired. It's found in being fully seen and choosing to stay anyway. Life has a quiet way of testing every lesson it has already taught you. Just when peace begins to feel permanent, the past often knocks on the door one last time. Spring returned to Chicago with gentle rain and budding trees. The city seemed to breathe again. Sidewalk cafes filled with laughter, flower boxes spilled over with color, and the lake reflected skies so blue they almost looked painted. Darius and Monica had settled into a rhythm neither of them tried to define. Saturday breakfasts, volunteer work, long evening walks where he rolled beside her through neighborhoods that had slowly become filled with shared memories. No labels, no pressure, only presence. One Thursday afternoon, Darius was speaking to a group of newly injured athletes at the rehabilitation center. "I spent 2 years believing my life ended the day I stopped walking," he told them. "The truth. My life ended the day I believed I had nothing left to offer." The room remained silent, not with pity, with recognition. After the meeting ended, his phone vibrated. A message from Angela. "Call me when you're free. It's about Evelyn." The name alone was enough to tighten his chest. He hadn't spoken it aloud in months. When he called, Angela hesitated before answering. "I thought you should know before someone else tells you." "Tells me what?" "Evelyn is back in Chicago." Darius stared through the rehabilitation center window. "So?" Angela sighed. "She contacted me. She wants to meet you." The words settled heavily between them. He expected anger, bitterness. Instead, he felt almost nothing. That realization surprised him more than the message itself. The following evening, he told Monica while they arranged donated books at the community center. She paused only briefly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She nodded. "You'll figure it out." No advice, no jealousy, no attempt to influence him. Just trust. 3 days later, Darius agreed to meet Evelyn at the same hotel cafe where they had celebrated their engagement years before. The place looked almost unchanged. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, fresh orchids decorating every table. Only the people had changed. Evelyn stood as he entered. She looked elegant as always, dressed in an expensive cream coat that perfectly matched the polished surroundings. For a moment, they simply looked at one another. "I've thought about this conversation for a long time," she whispered. "So have I." She sat carefully. "I owe you an apology." "You do." "I was afraid." "I know. I told myself I wasn't leaving because of your wheelchair." She lowered her eyes. "But eventually, I realized I was lying to myself." Tears filled her eyes. "I couldn't imagine the life ahead. I chose the easier road." The honesty surprised him. It also released something inside him, because for the first time, he no longer needed her to pretend. "I was selfish. Yes. I hurt you. Yes. And I don't expect forgiveness." Darius looked out across the hotel lobby. Months earlier, this room would have reminded him of humiliation. Now it simply looked like another building, another place, another chapter. "I forgive you." Evelyn blinked. "So easily?" He smiled gently. "It wasn't easy. It just happened before today." She searched his face. "Is there someone else?" For the first time, he didn't hesitate. "There is someone." Her expression shifted. Not jealousy, understanding. "Does she make you happy?" He thought about Monica laughing in the snow, organizing soup kitchens, bringing flowers nobody wanted, seeing the man instead of the wheelchair. "She reminds me who I am." A tear rolled down Evelyn's cheek. "I never knew how." "No, you didn't." Neither accusation nor anger remained in his voice, only truth. When they stood to leave, Evelyn extended her hand. Instead, Darius offered a warm embrace. Farewell. Not a reunion, not an unfinished love. Simply two people finally setting down the weight they had carried for too long. Outside the hotel, rain had begun to fall. Across the street, beneath a blue umbrella, Monica waited quietly. She hadn't asked to come inside. She hadn't wanted to interrupt. She had simply come because she promised to drive him home afterward. When Darius reached her, she searched his eyes. "How are you?" He smiled. "Lighter." She slipped her hand into his without another question. Together they crossed the rain-soaked street. Behind them, the hotel disappeared into the gray afternoon. Ahead of them, the city stretched wide with possibilities. And for the first time since the wedding that nearly destroyed him, Darius realized something extraordinary. Closure is not the moment the past apologizes. It is the moment the past no longer has the power to decide where your heart belongs. The greatest acts of love are rarely announced with speeches. They are revealed in the ordinary moments when someone quietly chooses to stay. A month after meeting Evelyn for the last time, spring matured into early summer. Chicago shimmered beneath clear skies. The trees along the lakefront stood deep green. Cafes spilled onto sidewalks, and music drifted through open windows as if the city itself had finally exhaled. One Saturday morning, Angela invited Darius and Monica to her house for a family barbecue. "You've avoided this long enough," she laughed over the phone. "The family wants to meet the mysterious woman." Monica groaned dramatically. "I don't like being mysterious." "You've had months to stop being mysterious." She arrived carrying 2 homemade peach pies balanced carefully in her arms. Darius carried nothing except a bag of board games Angela had specifically requested. As they entered the backyard, conversations slowed. Not because of the wheelchair, not because of Monica's size, because everyone had heard pieces of the story without ever meeting the woman who had quietly helped rebuild Darius's life. Angela walked over first and wrapped Monica in a warm embrace. "So you're finally here." "I've been here." Angela smiled knowingly. "I know." Children chased one another across the lawn while older relatives gathered beneath strings of paper lanterns. Someone started grilling ribs. Someone else argued over baseball. The afternoon unfolded with the comfortable chaos only family could create. Monica fit in almost immediately. She laughed with Darius's cousins, helped Angela's mother carry drinks, knelt beside children drawing colorful chalk pictures across the patio. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply made everyone around her feel comfortable. Late in the afternoon, Angela's elderly father wheeled over beside Darius. He watched Monica from across the yard. "You know what I like about her?" Darius smiled. "I have a feeling you're going to tell me. She never watches your chair." Darius looked toward Monica. She was listening intently to one of the children explain an imaginary dinosaur adventure. His father continued softly. "Most people look at your wheelchair every few seconds. They don't even realize they're doing it. But she looks at your face." The words settled quietly inside him. He had noticed it months ago. Now hearing someone else recognize it made the truth even more profound. As evening approached, everyone gathered around a long wooden table beneath glowing lights. Angela tapped her glass. "I want to make a toast." Conversations faded. She looked first at her brother, then at Monica. "When Darius's wedding fell apart, I thought I had lost my little brother forever." Emotion caught in her throat. "I watched him disappear while pretending everything was fine." She turned toward Monica. Then someone walked into his life carrying nothing more than kindness. Monica lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable with the attention. Angela smiled. "You didn't save him. You reminded him he was still worth finding." Silence settled over the table. Even the children stopped talking. Darius slowly reached for Monica's hand beneath the table. This time, he didn't let go. She looked at him, surprised. Not because he held her hand, because he did it in front of everyone, without hesitation, without fear, without wondering who might be watching. He stood as much as he could from his wheelchair, balancing carefully while resting one hand on the table. "I've spent a long time believing strength meant standing alone." He glanced toward Monica. "I was wrong." His voice remained calm. "Real strength is allowing someone to stand beside you." He turned fully toward her. "When we met, I thought you were bringing me flowers." A gentle laugh moved around the table. "I didn't realize you were bringing me my life back." Tears filled Monica's eyes before she could stop them. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "You found it yourself." He shook his head. "I found it because someone refused to stop seeing me." The backyard fell completely silent. No applause. No dramatic music. Only the soft rustling of leaves above them and the distant laughter of neighbors somewhere beyond the fence. Then, without planning it, Darius lifted Monica's hand and kissed her knuckles gently. The gesture was simple, old-fashioned, almost impossibly tender. Angela smiled through tears. Her father looked away for a moment, pretending to admire the sunset. Even the children seemed to sense they had witnessed something important. Not the beginning of a romance, but the completion of a healing. Because love had not arrived to rescue either of them. It had grown quietly between two people who first learned how to restore each other's dignity before ever asking for each other's hearts. And as the golden evening light settled across the backyard, every face around that table reflected the same quiet realization. The strongest foundation for love is never perfection. It is the courage to truly see another person and never look away. 1 year after the day that nearly destroyed him, Darius Brooks found himself standing, if only for a brief moment, at the place where his life had truly begun again. The ballroom looked almost identical. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. White roses lined the entrance. Soft piano music floated through the air exactly as it had the year before. But nothing felt the same, because neither did he. The hotel manager greeted him with a broad smile. "We're honored you accepted." Darius looked around the grand ballroom that had once witnessed the most humiliating day of his life. Tonight, it hosted the annual charity gala benefiting athletes recovering from catastrophic injuries and families rebuilding after personal loss. The community kitchen had partnered with the rehabilitation center. The rehabilitation center had invited local businesses. Angela had somehow convinced half the city to donate. And Monica had quietly spent 3 weeks organizing volunteers while refusing to let anyone thank her for it. As guests slowly filled the room, many recognized Darius. Not as the groom abandoned at the altar, but as the speaker whose rehabilitation program had helped dozens of injured athletes find purpose again. Some approached to shake his hand. Others thanked him for his work. One young man in a wheelchair rolled over nervously. "I heard your story 6 months ago." Darius smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came. I almost didn't." The young man looked down. "I thought my life was over." Darius recognized those words immediately, because they had once belonged to him. He placed a hand gently on the young man's shoulder. "It isn't over. It just looks different now." The young man's eyes filled with quiet hope. Across the ballroom, Monica adjusted centerpieces one final time. She wore a simple navy blue dress. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to attract attention. Yet somehow, every person who spoke with her walked away smiling. She still carried herself exactly the same. Quiet, warm, completely unaware of the extraordinary effect her ordinary kindness had on people. The evening began with dinner, then music, then stories from families whose lives had been changed through the rehabilitation programs. Finally, the master of ceremonies invited Darius to the stage. The ballroom grew still. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. 1 year earlier, those same walls had echoed with whispers of pity. Tonight, they waited with respect. Darius looked across the audience before beginning. "A year ago, I believed dignity could be taken from a person." His voice remained calm. "I believed it disappeared the moment someone rejected you, the moment your body failed, the moment your dreams collapsed." He paused. "I was wrong." The room listened without movement. Dignity doesn't disappear. We simply forget where to look for it. His eyes found Monica standing quietly near the back of the ballroom. She looked almost embarrassed that he had noticed her. "When I thought my life had ended, someone walked into this very building carrying nothing but compassion. They didn't offer miracles. They didn't promise to fix me. They simply treated me like I was still worth seeing." Silence wrapped itself around every table. "I've learned something since then. The people who change the world are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who quietly notice the person everyone else has stopped looking at." He stepped away from the podium. Instead of returning to his table, He wheeled slowly across the ballroom. Toward Monica. She looked confused. Darius. He stopped in front of her. Every conversation in the room faded. The musicians lowered their instruments. Even the waitstaff paused. He reached into his jacket pocket. Not for a ring, but for a single white rose. Its petals were almost identical to the flowers she had rescued from his abandoned wedding. I never thanked you properly. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. You don't have to. I do. He offered her the rose. You gave me these once because you said they hadn't done anything wrong. His voice grew softer. The truth is, neither had I. A tear rolled gently down Monica's cheek. And neither had you. She accepted the flower with trembling hands. No proposal followed. No dramatic declaration. None was needed, because everyone in that ballroom could already see what had taken root between them. It had never been built on perfection, or rescue, or obligation. It had been built on respect, on patience, on the quiet decision to keep showing up for another human being. The audience rose slowly to their feet, not because they had witnessed a romance, but because they had witnessed dignity restored. As applause filled the ballroom, Darius looked once more at the place where his old life had ended. He no longer saw heartbreak. He saw the doorway that had led him to grace. Beside him, Monica smiled through tears, holding the white rose close to her heart. And on that quiet evening, surrounded by people who now understood the difference between admiration and compassion, the world remembered a truth that had been waiting there all along. Respect is never earned through power, beauty, or perfection. It is earned through humility. And that day, everyone in the room remembered what dignity truly looks like.